Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our topic is how to win material. As we know, that's the second most important thing in chess. First of all, of course, is the safety of our kings, or checkmate. See if you can checkmate or make sure you avoid your opponent checkmating you. However, the next most important thing, if the checkmate is not in the picture, is if you can win material or to make sure to avoid losing your own pieces. And we shall see various examples of how that can come about. One of the topics we'll examine in this lesson is removing the guard. Let's see some examples. Here we go. Let's see this endgame. We can examine quickly the material balance, and we shall see that actually it is black who is ahead. Black has 2 rooks, the second most valuable piece next to the queen, while white has only 1 rook and 1 bishop, in addition to the pawns on the board, of course. So therefore, even though white has an extra pawn, it is black who is up by 1 point. The problem for black is that white's position is very active. As you can see, the white rook is on the 8th rank, the white bishop is in a very active position, and the king also, unlike in the opening or middle game when we try to hide our king, making sure it doesn't get into trouble, in the endgame the king very oftentimes becomes an important attacking piece. And it's no different here, and white has a very elegant move that actually disconnects between the 2 black rooks. Right now, the 2 rooks on the 7th rank protect each other. So what our job is in this situation is remove the guard, and in this case with a simple and quiet move. Can you think of that move? What it may be? Well, if you would think of playing rook e7, it would certainly disconnect between the 2 rooks, and in fact white would be threatening to capture both rooks on the next move. The problem is that after black would exchange the rooks, then would be free to move away with the other rook and be clearly still in the game. Therefore, the accurate move for white right now is to put the bishop on e7 and not the rook. Because right now, if the black rook captures the white bishop, that would not be an even trade as it was between 2 rooks. So what happens right now is, it's almost like if white have created a fork. If you look carefully, you'll notice that the white king all of a sudden is threatening both black rooks. And if either one moves away, the other one falls. So that's a very nice and elegant way to disconnect between the opponent's defensive pieces. Let's move on and see a different example. Here we go. In this position, we have a completely balanced position, at least if we talk about material. It's quite important to establish whose turn it is in this position. If it would be white's turn, white would have actually the upper hand by immediately having the opportunity to create a pin over the black knight by playing bishop to b5 and then capturing the knight, forcing the recapture of black's b7 pawn, and then black would have a ruined pawn structure, doubled pawns, isolated pawns. However, in our example, it was actually black's turn, not white's. And that was white's big problem. Try to think what may be the good move here for black to win material. Well, let me give a little hint. The hint is that the white bishop on e2 is being attacked, being pressured right now by black's rook on e8. The only reason why that bishop is doing okay for the moment is because the white knight is protecting it. So, what it means, removing the guard, if black would have the opportunity to chase that knight away, that would mean that the bishop would be undefended after that. And that's exactly what black needs to do. And the correct move to do just that is to play bishop h6, immediately attacking the knight on f4. If now that knight moves, the bishop on e2 will be taken. On the other hand, if the knight will be protected, then black will have the opportunity to exchange the bishop for the knight. And now either white captures back on f4 and loses his bishop, or moves his bishop away, and then white already lost the knight. If we go back to the very beginning and try to see if there was an equally good move, like for example bishop e5 attacking the knight from the other side, we'll realize that that will not quite cut it, because now the bishop is in between the black rook and the white bishop, and therefore the white bishop is quite safe. So the only correct move in the starting position was bishop h6, and then black is winning a piece one way or another. Let's move on and see a yet different position. Here we go. Right now, again, we have material balance with pair of rooks, bishops, and knights, in addition to 6 pawns each. It is white's momentum to try to win material. And this is kind of a hidden situation, because in reality, the black rook on c7 is overworked. It is trying to hang on to the bishop on b7 as well as the knight on c6. Although, at first it seems, but who is bothering the knight on c6? The white rook certainly doesn't seem to, as white has a knight on c5 in the way, so the black knight is not being attacked. But reality is that if white finds the correct move, white can destroy both defenders of the knight on c6. And that simple but powerful move is knight capturing on b7. What we see right now is that white captured a bishop, so if black does not capture back, in that case, white just won a bishop, is up a piece. On the other hand, if the rook does capture back, white is ready to capture the knight, and again, white won a piece. One other thing I'd like to point out, that if in this position, black would respond with a tricky knight d4 check, in that case, white shouldn't capture the knight, because then they would lose the rook, and black would get away with not as much loss as they should. It's more accurate to move the king out of the check, protecting the rook. Remember, white is already up a bishop. And if now rook takes knight, then the pawn from e3 captures black's knight, maintaining the extra piece. Or if rook captures rook on c1, the king just captures back. Another important detail to point out, that king d2 with similar ideas in protecting the rook on c1 would be a major blunder, allowing the fork with knight b3. So accuracy is certainly important till the very end. Let's go to the next example. Here we go. This is a quite tricky position. It is black's turn, and white has just attacked the black queen on b4. Right now, the normal regular response would be to move the queen away from the attack to a5, and then the game would carry on. White would have certainly some compensation. However, that would pass by the great opportunity that black has right now to win material. Try to think what move that may be, which is not moving the queen away from the attack. Generally, such moves are rather forceful moves, a check or a capture. So that's a big hint. Well, with that said, hopefully you got to the correct answer, which is to play knight e2 right now. What happens here is, all of a sudden, the diagonal of the black dark squared bishop on g7 has opened up, and black has very serious threats in capturing the white knight on c3. For example, if rook captures queen, the black bishop moves to c3, not only capturing a knight, but immediately pinning the white king and queen. And it's not hard to get convinced that black is coming out ahead clearly. Also, after knight e2, white did not have the option to simply recapture with a knight, because then, all of a sudden, the rook on b1 remains unprotected. A very nice example of intermediate move. Let's see the next example, which deals with a different situation. Here we go. In this endgame, it seems that white is doing fine. In fact, white is ahead. White still has a rook, while black doesn't. Black recently gave a check on a2, which white blocked. Things seem to be under control. Obviously, if black would exchange the queens and then try to win the pawn on d3, while black would be fine, the game would most likely end in a draw. Instead, in this position, black has a very precise opportunity to win the game actually, turn things around. Try to see how can that happen. Well, to give you a hint, the idea to accomplish that is to pull the hand of the white king away from protecting the white queen. And the brilliant combination is to play bishop d3. And now, whether the king captures that bishop or just moves out of the check, the white queen will be lost. It is a very typical pattern that I strongly suggest you engrave in your memory. And let's move on to our next example. Here we are. Here we're using a different pattern to accomplish a similar goal. Again, we're trying to remove the guard. And the piece that we're shooting for is black's bishop right now on c4. That bishop is protected by the rook on f4. So if that rook would not be where it is on the fourth rank, then the white knight from d6, just in one move, could capture that bishop. In order to accomplish this goal, all white needs to do is to simply move his own king up to g3, attacking the black rook. If the rook moves back to f6, for example, then indeed the white knight will just capture black's bishop on c4. On the other hand, if the rook intends to remain on the fourth rank and play rook to d4, now the problem is that the black rook and king are positioned in a way where all of a sudden the white knight can create a simple fork and then win the black rook, which obviously is an even worse scenario from black's perspective than just to lose the bishop. As we know, the rook is a more valuable piece than the bishop is. So therefore, from black's perspective, to do damage control, it would be to give up the bishop rather than the rook. Nevertheless, in either case, white would be winning significant amount of material. And let's see another example. Here we go. Now here the story is a little bit different because we are combining various patterns. On one hand, it is still about removing the guard, but yet, just as importantly, there will be an element of pinning. At this very moment, black is a knight up. So generally, that's a pretty big advantage. And if it would be black's turn in this position, black would certainly get the time to solidify their position, for example, by playing c7 to c6, securing the knight on d5. But in our case, it is white's turn. And therefore, time is the essence, making sure that black doesn't get to do that, and white will strike before black would get the time to protect everything safely. So here the whole issue is that the d5 knight is being pressured by the white bishop and queen, but at the moment the black queen and bishop do protect it sufficiently. So here the correct continuation is to remove one of those two guards, and very importantly combining it with the fact that if the black queen captures the rook, not only that white captures the knight on d5, but also at the same time right now is pinning black's queen on e6, and therefore black will lose a lot of material, the most important piece, the queen, and later the game. So going back to the starting position of this exercise, we can conclude that white has a good way to remove the guard being the bishop on e6, while the target being on one hand the knight on d5, and on the other hand the creation of a pin. You may wonder, but what happens if after the rook captures the bishop on e6, black now does not capture the rook? Well, that's still the better option for black, but nevertheless, in that case, after the queen would move away to some other square, white would have the opportunity to capture black's knight on d5, and as an evaluation, white would simply be up a bishop. As an end result, from the beginning position of this exercise, white won two pieces, a bishop and a knight. Certainly a great achievement in just two moves. Let's move on and see this example. Right now it is black's turn. It seems that things are pretty balanced with even material, and normally speaking, a position like this should end in a draw. However, in this particular position, black has a tactical opportunity to take advantage of the fact that the white rook on c1 is overworked, because it is serving as a defending piece in two directions. It is defending on one hand the rook on c3, and on the other hand the bishop on d1. The problem is, if black continues correctly, white will end up losing material. With this hint, can you try to figure out what should black's move be right now? And the answer to that question is to here capture the bishop on d1 with a check. Clearly, if white does not capture back, white will have a lot more losses. And if they do, then all of a sudden the rook is no longer protected on c3, and therefore black is simply in a winning position. Black has won a bishop. And let's move on to our next example. Here we are. This position is rather similar to some that we saw before, in that, again, there is a defender, and in this case, we are talking specifically about white's bishop on g2, and then the target, which the bishop protects, the knight on e4. So, hopefully, you can figure out the answer real quick here, which is to remove the guard by a sacrifice, giving up a more valuable piece for a less valuable piece, but then follow it up by capturing a second piece. As you can see, black gave up a rook, but in exchange got a bishop and a knight. And as we know, bishop and knight is worth 6 points, a bit more than just a rook. So therefore, this was a clear gain from black's perspective. And let's see our final example in this lesson. Here we go. In this middle game position, it is black who is a pawn up. However, if white finds the correct move, black gets in trouble. I suggest you take a few minutes and try to figure it out on your own. What's the winning move? And again, we're still on the same theme as of deflecting or removing the guard. And that correct move is to play bishop to h3. Now the black queen is attacked, and the black queen had a duty, and that is to keep protecting the rook on d8. As you can see, the queen does not have any reasonable square that would continue to do that. For example, if the black queen captures the white bishop, queen captures rook, and white is clearly ahead, and more trouble is facing black with the knight on e8 being pinned and next captured. On the other hand, if black would try to counterattack by playing f6, then the problem is that white would capture the queen, and then when black does the same, the knight on a4 is unprotected, and therefore black lost a piece. Well, we saw a good number of examples regarding removing the guard, a very important tactical theme in chess. I hope this helps you with your own games, trying to use this motif, or, on the other hand, prevent it from your opponent doing it to you. Thank you so much for listening. So long until next week, where I'll be back with more chess ideas. Bye-bye.